Joining me now on my panel is Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Alan Tudge, and also Labor MP, Andrew Leigh. Now, we've heard the analysis from David Spears there. We've also seen a media conference just out of Indonesia. Alan Tudge, we've certainly seen a different tone come from Tony Abbott out of this meeting. Would you agree with that?
Well, we always said that the first trip of the Prime Minister was going to be to Indonesia. It's one of our most important relationships, and when the Prime Minister went there, he said it was going to be constructive, it would be behind closed doors, having good conversations and working through the issues, and I think he's done exactly what he said he was going to do. But
he certainly stepped away from that bolshy language, you might say, that we saw during the election campaign. He also said that he'll be respecting Indonesia's sovereignty. What does he mean by that? Does this mean the turnbacks will happen?
We've always said we'd respect Indonesia's sovereignty, but we had a suite of policies which we took to the election, and we're determined to implement those. Some of those we can implement unilaterally. Others do require the cooperation of Indonesia to be able to implement.
Are these two policies that do require the
Well, the turn back the boats policy, for example, doesn't. It requires Indonesia's understanding, but by and large that's all occurring on Australian waters. So we won't go into Indonesian waters without their cooperation, but we can turn boats back around in our waters or in international waters.
Andrew Leigh, Tony Abbott did make the point today that he felt that some of the reporting around the turn back the boats policy wasn't exactly correct. He made the point that they're not towbacks, they're turning them around when safe to do so. Would you agree that perhaps that policy is not as bad as perhaps being made out?
Well, we know, Laura, from former officials such as Chris Barry that this is an unworkable policy. It's dangerous for asylum seekers because boats are now immediately scuttled, people are in the water, and it's dangerous for our personnel as well. It's also dangerous for the diplomatic relationship, which is why Mr Abbott would have been best placed.
Isn't there a new understanding here? And if Tony Abbott says this has been discussed behind closed doors, shouldn't the opposition now be giving it a go?
It is an unworkable policy, Laura, just as the boat buyback is unworkable.
Do you accept that Indonesia might not agree with you?
I've seen no evidence from any Indonesian politician suggesting that this is a workable policy. Instead, what we've seen is Marty Natalegawa, the Indonesian Foreign Minister, very clearly repudiating the coalition on their immigration policy and doing so in unprecedented terms. It's pretty disappointing that the coalition is...
This is a policy area, though, that Labor wasn't able to resolve. There's a new government. Don't you need to give them time to implement their own solutions?
But Laura, you have to take into account the relationship with Indonesia. I lived for 3 years in Indonesia when I was a child. It's a country which places huge value on the importance of respectful dealings. And I'm not sure that Mr Abbott has dealt with Indonesia with the appropriate level of respect in the past. I'd like to see, he appears to be doing a little bit more of that, but every now and then he falls back into the old campaigning speeches. So using lines like sugar on the table reminded me of Mr Abbott's sort of overly partisan speeches when John Key and Barack Obama came to the Australian Parliament.
Laura, can I just make one comment? Unfortunately, we do have a little bit of damage to the relationship which we have to fix up, and that occurred because under the former government they cut off part of Indonesia's food supply overnight without warning. Now that damages the relationship, as does unravelling the border protection regime, which did stop the boats in the past. And so we unfortunately have to go in and do some of the heavy lifting which Labor didn't do.
I'll get to live cattle in a moment, but first on some of the damage done, don't you accept that Tony Abbott from opposition did engage in some of this megaphone diplomacy, and that could have also damaged the relationship as well?
We were in opposition, we weren't in government. The two critical things which hurt the relationship with Indonesia: one, cutting off the food supply; two, unravelling the border protection regime, which did work. Now we're trying to piece the pieces back together again, and we took a suite of policies to the election, and we're determined to implement those, many with the cooperation of the Indonesian government.
Andrew Leigh, just on the live cattle trade, this is something that did really strain relationships with Indonesia. It looks like that relationship hasn't exactly been repaired. You'd accept that that was now perhaps in hindsight the wrong thing to do, or the wrong way to approach it?
Laurie, your viewers remember back to the horrendous scenes of animal abuse that we saw at the time, and I think it was appropriate that the Australian government, the Labor government, said that if a live cattle trade is to continue in the long term, it has to continue on a sustainable,
but it did harm the relationship.
Basis.
Do you accept that?
Well, I think we did the right thing. I think it certainly posed challenges, and we spoke with Indonesia about those. But we were very clear that if you're going to maintain live animal exports, it has to be done in a way that maintains the support of the Australian public.
But you cut off the food supply overnight, Andrew. That was the problem. You cut off a big component of their food supply overnight off the back of a television program. Yes, there were issues which had to be dealt with, but they could have been dealt with in a systematic way in cooperation with the Indonesian government, rather than, as I said, overnight cutting off the food supply.
Alan, Australians were clamouring for action on this. This wasn't just a television program. This was a serious issue where many of us were horrified at looking at those images. If the trade was to be successful, we had to take firm action when we did, and that's why it's continued.
Alan Tudge, just finally to you, we talked about, or Tony Abbott talked about foreign investment, Indonesian investment, particularly in Northern Australia when it comes to cattle farms. They want to invest about $1 million hectares worth of farmland. Now, he said, bring it on, this investment. This is not going to wash well with in the Nationals, are they? Some of your colleagues?
Foreign investment is a good thing, and all of us agree that foreign investment, by and large, is a good thing. Now, that investment has to be in Australia's national interest, and we have a Foreign Investment Review Board which can make those determinations, and we've put in place policies, or will put in place policies, to lower the thresholds upon which the Foreign Investment Review Board gets to look at these decisions.
Okay, Alan Tudge, Andrew Leigh, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Laura.
And
thanks, Laura.
After the break, we will be looking at that looming federal government shutdown in the United States, just 13 minutes away. Stay with us. Bruce Wolpe will be joining us.